Hello, and welcome to this original podcast from the Office of Global Perspectives and International Initiatives at the University of Central Florida. My name is Ashley LaFlamme, a special projects intern with GPII, and I will be your host for today's interview. Today, we have the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Lawrence Rubin. Dr. Rubin is the co-director of the Georgia Tech DC program and an associate professor in the Sam Nunn School of International Affairs. He also serves as an associate fellow at the International Institute for Strategic Studies and is a life member on the Council of Foreign Relations. With research interests in Middle Eastern politics, global nuclear security, international security policy, regional security challenges, and terrorism, Dr. Rubin's work has taken him across the world, including Morocco, Egypt, Israel, Jordan, the UAE, and Yemen. Today, we are honored to host him here at UCF's Office of Global Perspectives and International Initiatives. Thank you, Dr. Rubin, for joining us. It is a pleasure to have you with us today.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
That's wonderful. We are excited to have you. To start, Dr. Rubin, your academic and professional journey includes remarkable contributions to international security and Middle Eastern politics. Could you share with us how your path began? What first sparked your interest in the intersection between international relations, religion, and conflict?
I'm not sure whether to balance it was a question of being interested regionally or not, but certainly I was interested in religion and politics in the region. It fascinated me. It was something that I really wanted to get at when it comes to the intersection of culture, interest, politics, everything like that. But I've always been interested in the broader question of big questions about how it affects the global world, and how these influences from the international system of politics affect domestic politics in that way. So it's kind of this going back and forth, and particularly the Middle East, you just have the mosaic of ethnicities, religions, all intersecting, and it just kind of, it was something that, since there weren't clear answers, I found that actually very fascinating. The history is so interesting. There's so many different reasons why that one could that I got interested in the region in particular.
Thank you for your insight, Dr. Rubin, and what relevant research to do. As a student myself, I am always surrounded by peers who are looking for ways to take their interests in similar research initiatives and turn that passion they share into career experience. Your work on the Georgia Tech DC program seems to offer students that opportunity. Dr. Rubin, as co-director of the program, could you tell us a little more about the program and the value it offers to interested students?
Yeah, this is really a passion of mine, in part because what I've seen is students have been transformed by this program, and also, in a sense, they're transforming themselves by it. The program is such, we're in our third year doing it, and we're now doing it in fall and spring semesters. And it works this way. Students take 2 classes with me and my co-director, one in each, and then do a full-time, 30 to 40 hour a week internship, and they receive full academic credit there. And what's really exciting about this is that they can be regular full-time students at Georgia Tech, but gain great experience, understand and kind of make great connections, networking connections, social, learning how the professionalization of DC works and professionalizing themselves that way, learning something substantive, and come away with thinking about what we hope is some type of bug of public service, of a sense of saying this is something valuable and important to contribute to our society, for their careers in that way, or not. You know, it's also for doing internships. We advise students of saying that maybe you want to pursue an internship to figure out maybe I don't want to do. I did the same thing in college. I interned for a congressman and realized that wasn't necessarily the path that I wanted to pursue in the future. So there's kind of no harm in that. But this is really a great way, because if people do want to go to Washington, D.C. in the future, one of the things that I at least advise students is you have to be there, and because you have to create these networks and connections and know the landscape. And what we've seen is really the students that come back to campus, they're really transformed by this experience, both just kind of professionally. They come back as different students, people looking at the world and looking at their classes also remarkably in remarkably different ways.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing a little more about the program. That truly sounds like a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Now, I'd like to take a moment to shift away from student opportunities and instead focus on some of your most relevant research topics. I'd like to begin our discussion with the topic of artificial intelligence. Your work as a researcher on emerging technologies and their relationship to national security puts you at the forefront of studying AI as a potential tool for national security efforts and what the future could potentially hold for its implementation. Could you tell us how you see AI impacting U.S. national security?
Yeah, that is kind of like the most pressing question right now. Extremely exciting, and for some wearisome in that way. But they're both opportunities and risks in many dimensions and domains. And without going into specifics of the different types of capabilities it could add to in that way, because I think a lot of it is not just AI itself; it's what and how you adapt and adopt it to existing capabilities. Is really who will benefit, how you enhance national security. That is really the key to is what people in the Defense Department and other places will say winning if it's about peer competitors, but about just making yourself more secure. And it's this application that really is is really how we will transform both how you want to say to secure and protect ourselves, and as well as and our friends and allies there too. When it comes to more specifics, this can be applied. It's almost like electricity across many domains. So almost to talk about it separately is probably not doing it service of everything we do in some capacity. It's driven by it. And everything we do in our lives, most of the things we do in our lives now has some component in that way, whether we like it or not. And then it's really a question of how we recognize the limitations, but also the strengths of what we're using. I mean, one of the biggest things, of course, is how to manage. And there are many other things, but just to zero in on one thing: manage the massive amounts of data we're collecting, both with some of these new technologies and capabilities, not just in the data collection, but also data sorting and management. And this is really, I think, what we are trying to figure out in various ways. Now, it also could be things that are I wouldn't say less talked about, get less attention, even though it's the learning process of developing new technologies with these, with artificial intelligence, and how scientific learning will increase exponentially in terms of the time that we find things. This can go into discoveries of new medicines and vaccines. And we talked about national security. Of course, the flip side is maybe using these technologies, of course, for defensive net measures, or adversaries may have access to the same types of advanced technologies as well. So you have to think about how are you going to develop and invest in this research to be able to combat your potential adversary or bad actors that may use this type of technology nefariously.
It really does sound like we're standing at a new frontier when it comes to this technology. That's so exciting. Thank you for talking about that. Now, you've explored a wide range of topics in your research, from nuclear stability to religion and Arab politics and counterterrorism. However, more recently, your research has taken a turn towards exploring space and its relation to these topics. How did you get into the study of space? And what connections have you made to your past research?
Well, I like to joke that I have kind of academic ADHD, and there's a lot of truth in that way. But part of it is driven by, and you talk about the wide range of subjects, is that the profession I've chosen and been fortunate enough to pursue is one where I can move around and learn new things, and that's what I love about doing what I do. I'm constantly learning, and sometimes in big ways or big leaps. Space kind of, and I'll say in general, trying to understand more and learn more about technology that way, emerging technologies. I'm at an Institute of Technology. I'm trained as a social scientist, but that studied area studies, and it doesn't seem like be a right fit. But the school, the Sam Nunn School of International Affairs, certainly when I entered it, was kind of saw itself as at being the nexus of science and technology policy. And I think since I've been there, more and more along those lines, and you can't not engage in it in some way, because the Institute itself, both in the basic research level as well as the applied research level, deals in developing these really incredible technologies. So it's almost like a kid in a candy store. And so you see these things happening around you, and I may not understand so much about it, but the added value could be, or is often, and this would be a lesson for students as well, is thinking of, okay, these really, really smart people are doing these really cool things, building things and trying to understand them. What are the implications for X and Y? It may be about what are the implications, what could we see the possibilities for the commercialization of this product, but what are the effects on society? And so what I do in that way, or try to figure out, and I've done this in a couple of projects, is figuring out what are the political implications if you develop this technology that you weren't really thinking about what the outcome might be. So some of the most interesting conversations I've had is when you sit down with people who are totally focused on this, creating some product and then saying, well, what would this mean if you could develop X or Y for something like, we did this once with a project on quantum sensing and strategic deterrence. How does this affect this? What are the pluses and minuses? And really good engineers are weighing what are the costs and benefits of developing this further or not, and do you already have the capabilities to do what you want to do with existing systems, and do you invest in X or Y? Because they're thinking also not just about building something, they're like, how much does it cost to build something and at what scale? Anyway, so with space, to kind of get to your question, this is really a convergence of so many other areas or realizing that everything, or so much of what we do, connects in some way to space. If it's transactions, if it's day-to-day telecommunications, you have a shutdown of something, then there's something, maybe it went down to the heavens, minus cutting the internet cords underseas is a little different. And with this, it was through a project with a graduate student and a colleague of mine, both of them interested in space, and I was kind of taking more of the angle of deterrence, and we wrote something together. And then eventually we did a webinar, and a different colleague had invited me to spend a week, which was fun. I call it Space Camp at the Air Command Staff College, and to learn more about space and its industry. And so it's almost learning this whole new field and learning about it both from the civil space exploration side, the scientific side, the very basics, the economic side, and then there's a national security side. So it all kind of comes together. And what I wanted to do was to leverage the knowledge of regional affairs with emerging technologies and space, and they all kind of come together. So that's what I've been focused on more recently.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing that. That is such a unique approach. I just wanted to say, here at UCF, we are known as the Space University, so it is an honor having you here and speaking on that topic.
Well, it's an honor to be here at this place.
Thank you so much. Moving on, the Middle East remains a region often misunderstood or misrepresented in American discourse. As someone who has conducted extensive research there, what do you think are the biggest misconceptions Americans have about the Middle East? Are there any stories or lessons from your time in the region that you think Americans should hear?
Yeah, and I think this, when I started to explore this more on a professional level, I'll say in graduate school doing a PhD, this was both, I started before 9/11, and this was a transformative moment, and a lot of people may not remember that, except for people of my generation that well, and obviously older, where there were a lot of these misconceptions, but there's a lot of attention to the Middle East, and it was drawing on a lot of the things that people know about the Middle East being about oil and terrorism and so forth. And so there was this effort to say, okay, it's more about that. And then since then, what people know is, I think from the outside, and I'll get to the kind of the root of your question in a second. If they saw the 2000s, it was the United States was involved in Iraq, and there's a lot of bloodshed, and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict comes and goes in big waves. Most recently, we see it all over the headlines. The same thing with preventing Iran from developing a nuclear capability, and just a lot of chaos and a lot of violence there, and less so, of course, we know about energy resources. So what I think people don't fully appreciate is that there's these, I think in Americans in general, sometimes myself included, you go to a place or a region and think the whole region is thinking about you and the relationship to that place. And they may see you they see you as an American, and I'm thinking immediately about my country's relationship to that. But they have their own lives, they have their own cultures in that way that exist outside and independently of this relationship and of your relationship as a Westerner coming into that country. And they want a lot of the same things that you want. They may have different sets. And just as Southerners or Northerners might approach things differently in our country. The gaps might be different from one culture to another, but just different types of values, cultural values and norms. And some are universal, and some are just different ways of approaching things. And I think with that understanding, there are some baselines, and people don't understand that there are baselines about people wanting a better life. They want, a traditional family life might be caring for their kids and so forth. And that, even things like violence is not widespread. There are low crime rates in a lot of the countries too, that are things that are culturally unacceptable. And, whereas you may not feel safe in some of our cities the same way you would feel safe walking around in some cities in various capitals in the Middle East. And those are some of the other things too, and that I think are various misconceptions. I think people generally are warm and friendly and hospitable, and as opposed to worrying that somebody's not going to like you because they don't like your country's foreign policy. And look, the United States is, a lot of countries are often upset with their foreign policy, but you're not going to please everybody. And also being a global leader, there's always somebody who's going to have some complaint about foreign policy.
Thank you so much for sharing that experience. Thank you for reflecting on the people as well, rather than just policy. That's so important to talk about. Next, I would like to move on to a little bit about your career. So through your career, you've collaborated with students, researchers, and policymakers alike. Were there any mentors or pivotal experiences that shaped your perspective or guided your approach to international affairs?
Yeah, there's certainly mentors that I've seen of how they've done it, and a few in particular I was involved in that led, both from being a graduate student of people I saw, their careers were absolutely fascinating, and I may not have chosen that path for either because personal family circumstances don't fit that, or maybe I wanted to do something slightly differently. Or, and then as I kind of started out in the professional track, there were a group that wanted to kind of bridge this policy academic gap. And there was this group called Bridging the Gap. And some of those professors are really, kind of showed a roadmap of how or what you could work on pressing policy issues, contribute to academia, and then also trying to figure out how do you do this. And some had served in government, some not. So that was kind of the track. It was, in particular, among others, but Jim Goldgeier and Bruce Gentleson were among others that started this group. There are a number of cohort kind of more closer to my age and peers that helped run this program. And they kind of really paved the road for a lot. And this network has grown tremendously and really kind of charted this path. And I think it's something we want to develop even further. Even at Georgia Tech now, we're launching this new initiative. We're kind of relaunching a very important policy journal called Orbis, where we really want to connect and make this connection between the policy and academic world and do policy relevant pieces that are academically informed there. But to get to it, the other thing to kind of answer on a personal level, that path that I had mentioned, one of the greatest experiences I had as kind of, I would say maybe mid-career then, was I did a Council on Foreign Relations International Affairs Fellowship and was at the Pentagon for a year in the Office of Secretary of Defense for Policy. And I spent time both at the Middle East Policy Office as well as countering WMD. And that allowed me to see firsthand the policy making process of something that I had studied and written about. I wasn't necessarily a U.S. foreign policy expert, but just to see that and to understand how things worked or didn't work in a lot of ways, how you do get outcomes. A couple times, I could mention ideas of when if I would have thought of a certain action of something, a U.S. foreign policy decision, and I'd been on the outside, I would have probably been humble enough to guess this is why it happened. But I was totally wrong. I would have been wrong because of how it kind of played out in real life, that it may be a lot of times about bureaucratic politics and personalities clashing or somebody not being at the meeting that day. It's not saying all decisions are there, but that also leaves open those possibilities. There are so many lessons learned. So I came away from that really transformed in a couple of different ways. One is appreciative of the experience, the level of dedication of civil servants in the government and in society. And particularly at the Pentagon, I was really impressed by even people that I sense, but I would have no way to know that you wouldn't know their political beliefs. They were executing policy, and they were dedicating. They're really smart people, all working towards this public good. And I think it's really a shame, that we do have this denigration of public servants, but really dedicated, smart people working for public service and public good, regardless of who's there. And that was something I appreciated. I appreciated the mission. I appreciated being part of a mission. In academia, you come from where you're really individually oriented, even though I've published with others. And I think that taught me that lesson too. I love the idea of a sense of mission. And so once at a certain point in my career, when I kind of established myself, I like working on things together. That kind of replicates it. And so I don't mind sharing in a sense. You don't need the spotlight doesn't need to be on you all the time, but it can be on your team and that outcome. So that really has had a tremendous effect. I'd love to go and work again in some capacity, because I learned things that I didn't learn, not necessarily substantively, but more of the policy process and how these relationships interact.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing that experience. What an exciting path you've been on, and we look forward to seeing your future initiatives. That was truly wonderful, sir. Thank you. Finally, for those listening who aspire to enter the fields of diplomacy, intelligence, or peace building, what advice would you offer as they begin their own journeys?
Oh, wow. Well, I have a lot to offer, but and I try to be really careful about not offering too much, I guess, tailored to the situation. One is if you are interested in those fields, find a way to get to Washington, D.C. That's a huge thing to do. The reason why it's so important is because the city is largely about relationships. And the only way you're going to build those are to kind of be around people. We can talk about this virtual world. We can talk about all these connections digitally, but you really have to be there. And you have to be alongside and working and growing up with people. So incredibly valuable experience. And this is going back to kind of establishing this program. And hopefully, you'll have this as well at University of Central Florida one day. Two is to have a program that you can spend time in Washington, D.C., a whole semester, and do a semester and create those relationships and have that work experience and be able to draw on those networks in the future. Because a lot of times jobs there, they may be advertised in that way, but you hear about them. And a lot of time they're built on trust. This person was a great, worked well for me. I can trust this person. I want to hire this person. Having moved there 8 years ago, and we've stayed, I've seen it with my colleagues, but friends kind of how they grew up professionally in there versus me kind of coming in after 8 years. But they can call on somebody 5 years later or 5-10 years like, oh, hey, I've got this job here. And it's not saying it's nepotism, but you can understand why, because they can trust and they know this person is really good. And DC is a small place. And so the other advice is be really good at what you do. Even if you're given a job that might seem menial, remember, somebody's assessing, are you going to carry out this job or this task? And when you do and start in some of these positions also, they're entry level. So you may not get to do, if you've studied China, for example, you may not get to do Chinese foreign policy. I mean, it's unlikely a 23-year-old is going to go in and do this direct thing. But if you work for a think tank, you're going to be organizing events, moving chairs around, ordering meals. I do some of that sometimes. But that is how you establish yourself as a reliable employee in a certain sense, but as somebody that can really get the job done. And then you'll get those other opportunities. And it may be that the second or third year you have more research time and you help as an assistant. So be ready to take anything, to work hard, and just to get there physically.
Thank you so much for sharing that. That's truly wonderful. And thank you again, Dr. Rubin, for sharing your insights and experiences with us today. We truly appreciate your time and look forward to seeing the continued impact of your work. This has been Ashley LaFlamme from UCF's Office of Global Perspectives and International Initiatives. To stay up to date with all our events and initiatives, visit our website at ucfglobalperspectives.org. That's all for this episode. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.